Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Music For You podcast. My name's Josh, and today we're going to be covering a new album. This album is going to be 2020 by the band Knuckle Puck. The album was released on September 18th, and Knuckle Puck is of course, pop-punk, emo, American rock band from Chicago. And just before we get started, I just want to let everyone know the last episode I covered of our album review series was over Movement's No Good Left to Give. I had some lukewarm feelings on that album, but nonetheless, I thought it was a solid effort by the band. That was an improvement from the last album. If you haven't checked out that album, I suggest if you're interested in any post-hardcore emo music, or even dream pop, you might like that album. But also just check out the review if you got some time. Also, if you have not listened to the newest episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week, that was covering the week of October 3rd. I liked covering this week, mainly because there's a lot of music I like, but it was just a shit show in terms of like a lot of things that came in. But yeah, if you're interested on my thoughts on that week of new entries onto the Billboard Hot 100, go ahead and check on that episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week. Some interesting stuff on there. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So like I was saying earlier, this episode is going to be covering the latest album by the band Knuckle Puck, the album titled 2020. And just to give a brief introduction to them, they are an American rock band from the suburbs of Chicago, formed in 2010 according to Wikipedia. They're also listed as pop, punk, and emo, which I find more fitting than just generalizing them as a rock band. There's nothing wrong with that, but they do lean heavily onto their pop punk tendencies. But anyways, Knuckle Puck is an interesting band, mainly because they're part of like a resurgence of pop punk in the 2010s. Them and like Neck Deep and among other smaller pop punk bands for some reason gained traction in the early to mid 2010s. Their formation was pretty interesting too. They started as mainly as a cover band, and then eventually went to writing originals. And it seems like they took off relatively quickly because they earned a signing to Rise Records in 2014 after releasing their first EPs that same year. Also including an EP that was released alongside Neck Deep, the other prominent pop punk band from that era. In 2014 as well. So it seems like they found their footing quite quickly, and they ended up releasing their debut album, Copacetic, in 2015. And I knew about Neck Deep for a number of years. I am not a heavy listener into pop punk. However, in my youth, especially around high school and middle school, I loved the genre, and some of my favorite bands of all time came from there, such as Paramore, My Chemical Romance, and then if we even want to go a little bit further down the road, Green Day, Blink-182. So I am the genre does hold a special place in my heart, especially since when I was younger and I was learning how to play music, I would gravitate towards that genre to learn how to play. And if anyone remembers the channel Fuse, they're still around, but back then it was strictly just a music channel that would play blocks and segments of like curated lists of music videos, such as Steven's Entitled Rock Show. But I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but anyways, I just felt like that was worth mentioning. So I feel like Copacetic was pretty successful in terms of like their placement in the genre. I feel like they have some successful tracks on that album, such as Disdain, that I remember discovering a long time ago on YouTube. And the video does have like 1.7 million views, which is pretty good for a band like Knuckle Puck. And when I went back and listened to Copacetic, it felt like this album had a rawer sound compared to this new album here. I feel like that's quite apparent in the end track titled Untitled, with how angsty the track feels, along with like these shouty vocals that accentuate the emotional moments in the track. I felt like that was a sort of the album in a nutshell for me. And compared to Copacetic, I feels like 2020 has more of a concise and more accessible sound to it. And it seems like a lot of bands that I've been reviewing this year have been pushing more for accessibility. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it feels like Knuckle Puck is just really another band on that list. And I guess that's a little interesting because we saw that with the Hines album, we saw that with the Hazel English album, and I'd say that ended up working in their favor. And here I feel like it's quite apparent that in comparison to the debut album, this album leans much more on the pop side of the pop punk side. And just from starting out, the beginning of this album kind of captivated me. I wasn't expecting to be drawn in. We do get the title track opening the album 2020. There's some good parts on here. The track really builds up to the chorus, where in my opinion, the track sounds the most lush and captivating. It's not a bad track. It wasn't quite a highlight, but it's a good opener for the album overall. There's some nice contrast in the track as well, where it's not just loud, shouty, fast parts. There's an overall more quieter, exposed sound on moments on the album, on moments of the track. I don't quite get drawn in until the second track, Tune You Out. I found this track interesting because we have some obvious, like, Taking Back Sunday influence on here with some dry, clean guitar tones used throughout the track. And then also when they turn up the distortion and, on more harder parts, there's crunchy guitar tones that are used throughout the track and some peaking melodic bass guitar too. And there's some moments of nice vocal harmony throughout the album as well, that give the track a more sensitive touch. And this track overall just kind of gives me a classic pop punk vibe, and the instrumentals I think are the saving grace here. They're quite solid. And I feel like that's kind of like a microcosm of this whole album, because we do kind of get the consistency all throughout. The crunchy guitar tones, the impressive bass work, the vocal harmonies that are executed quite well. This track, Sidechain, was kind of another highlight for me. It's not a bad. The guitar tone on here on these guitars are crunchy and solid as well. I enjoy hearing that. There's a nice and rhythmic groove in the verses with some lively guitar melodies thrown in. The track transitions well into the chorus and then back out. I like when bands are able to do that seamlessly. I love the prominence of the bass on parts of this track as well. It really comes out as well in the production. And the bass also comes out with some melodic moments towards the bridge that I appreciate as well. It's kind of giving the listener a reminder that that instrument is there. It doesn't serve to just aim for this generic purpose that a lot of bass guitar does in rock music. And overall, this track does start to introduce the poppiness overall. It has a very catchy chorus, and that's extended to the next track as well, Earthquake. Where this wasn't quite a highlight for me, but I found it interesting because it leans so heavily on the poppiness of the pop punk genre. And just in my opinion, it kind of gives me a bit of like a juvenile sense. Kind of like when I said on the Stand Atlantic album, the songs sound like they could be maybe played on like a Radio Disney playlist with how oversimplified the lyrical content and the songwriting can be. Overall, it's a straightforward track and it's executed decently, but I feel like it kind of stuck out to me and not necessarily in a good way. But then we kind of go back to like the same consistency in the next track, RSVP, when this album sounds quite good. I love how rhythmic and prominent the bass guitar is on this track as well. This track gives me a sense of like some late 2000s pop punk and emo as well, especially with like the songwriting. It sounds like it could have fit quite well within that era. And again, we got some nice crunchy distorted guitars all throughout the track. The guitar work is also colorful all throughout. It livens up the track when the guitars are most present, which it happens, mainly in the choruses. And the guitar work is quite colorful throughout the track too. It really livens up the track overall. The next track, Breathe, is another pretty accessible track featuring Derek Saunders, which I believe is of Mayday Parade fame, which that band is on the same level as Knuckle Puck, which is Rise Records. I love the main groove on this track. It's executed quite well. It feels more truer. This track feels more true to this mid 2000s pop punk revival style. This is kind of when this is part of the album when you're starting to hear that most present. And it's kind of late for that to be introduced into the album, which I found interesting. Overall, the album up until this point has felt quite more of the 2000s pop punk, and this now feels more contemporary, I guess. I love how the bass is mixed. It's in this track as well. You can kind of feel all throughout this track the drive and energy that the bass lines and performance gives to the track. But I wasn't super sold on this track, but I feel like overall all the parts fit in so well. The guitars just do enough to not over-dominate the track, but still remain interesting, especially when these guitar melodies are played in and out of the verses and choruses. It's not bad. It just wasn't my favorite track of the album. The next track, What Took You So Long, again, it was not much of a highlight either. It's probably the most straightforward and unimpactful track on this album. I do appreciate this gritty and prominent bass guitar tone in the track, and the production on the guitar sounds quite well too. I just wasn't a huge fan of the song overall. The next track, Into the Blue, is another highlight for me. This opening guitar riff, it does sound a tad too similar to the previous song on What Took You So Long, but I guess it just stuck out to me, but it's not a huge deal. I love the punchiness in this chorus. The bass here continues to be consistent and prominent and well performed. It features a pretty catchy chorus that I think makes the track have a good balance of like accessibility but also captivation. I also love how clear the guitars sound on this track as well. You can hear the distinctness in each part clearly. I like that about this album. A lot of the guitar production isn't just muddled up and I guess undistinct. You can hear each part quite nicely. The next track, Green Eyes, parentheses polarized. It opens up with a playful mood overall. Here's where I kind of start hearing some more issues with the album. Not huge ones, but it just doesn't have, this track just doesn't have the same punch as like the previous tracks on this album have. I do appreciate the different character overall. It's a nice touch. But I just kind of got some similarities to like maybe some other Stand Atlantic work, maybe like the earlier stuff, like the track Coffee at Midnight. But overall, it didn't really come out as a highlight to me. And then we have the track True North, where at this point the album kind of just feels a little, I guess, stale. It's not a huge issue. I'm still enjoying it, but I don't know what it is. The track has like these lingering held out guitar tones in the intro, and then maybe I'm getting some listener fatigue because it kind of just sounds like an atypical pop punk style here, maybe starting to seep into their songwriting, which up until this point seemed pretty distinct and unique. And maybe the distorted guitar tones here are just too blared or in your face as you digest this. And I'm just somewhat indifferent. Maybe I'm missing the rhythmic ideas that are on other tracks where, they hold my interest more. The track does have some highlights. There's some pretty vocal harmonizations here as well. This just wasn't my favorite track on here. And then we kind of get like a lukewarm closer, Miles Away. Really, if I would have enjoyed this album a whole lot more if they just didn't end the album this way. And mainly what Miles Away provides is just another straightforward track that suffers from some of the issues that I was hearing on the previous track. But I appreciate how the vocal harmonies sound on here. They come out quite nicely on these choruses, and the track seems to sound most captivating on those choruses if the song has anything going for it. I'm not exactly sure why. I think the song's just kind of okay. But I felt like they could have gone out in a better way, especially for this being their sophomore album. I don't think this is quite a sophomore slump, but I think there's some highlights and then there's some lows too. I'm feeling like this album possibly could even be a good introduction to the band if Knucklepuck is still growing their fan base, which for a sophomore album, that very well might be the case. In comparison to their debut album, Copacetic, I think they are similar in terms of enjoyment. Obviously, I went more into what I enjoyed about 2020 and what I disliked about 2020, but if you're a fan of this band and you're expecting another Copacetic, I'd say maybe lean more on the side of caution, because this 2020 album is, like I said, a lot more accessible. It's a little bit more playful. But that can be a good thing. Pop punk should not take itself too seriously as well. Just in my opinion, this is all just my thoughts. But anyways, I'm feeling like a 6 out of 10 on this album. I do enjoy a lot of parts of it, but I just felt like there's so much more room for potential. But I am excited for the future of the Knucklepuck, of this band Knucklepuck. But anyways, yeah. If you streamed up until this point, thank you for listening to this episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name's Josh. I'll be reviewing much more music soon. And however you're streaming today, however it may be, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you're able to give some feedback, like in the comments section, please do so, good or bad. I'm open ears. Also, if you like what you're hearing, please give me a like and subscribe. Or if you're just on a streaming service like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe as well. And thanks for giving me a listen. I'll be reviewing some more albums soon. See you later.